instead of going to dinner and a movie, I kind of have a stomach ache. I think I'd like to go to the clinic, make sure I don't have the stomach flu instead. And I said, sure, babe, we can do whatever you want, and maybe grab dinner afterwards. My daughter, Jasmine, sits up in her chair, looks at her mom, gasps, and says, Dad, is she okay? And I looked at her, and I could tell she had stopped breathing. And we summoned for the nurse. Dina came in and pronounced her dead at 10:54 p.m. She said, it's beautiful. And she said, I'm already home.
Shane, I want you to share in detail the events of March 13th of 2022, and I want you to share from the time that you woke up that day to the time that you went to bed.
Sure. Actually, if I can start with February 24th,
Okay.
That's maybe a better starting place for me.
Okay.
I flew home. I greet my wife as I would any other time coming home. She was in our home office, and we talked about our trip. There was some weather in Texas, some sleet and snow that were kind of potentially going to postpone our trip. So we talked about that, and then we decided to go to dinner and a movie that night. Nothing uncommon. It was two of our favorite pastimes as almost empty nesters. That's what we did almost every week. And so as we planned that, she finished up in her office, and a few hours later she came out. I was sitting on the couch, and she said, instead of going to dinner and a movie, I kind of have a stomach ache. I think I'd like to go to the clinic, make sure I don't have the stomach flu instead. And I said, sure, babe, we can do whatever you want, and maybe grab dinner afterwards. And we went to a grocery store, Fry's. Inside, they had a local clinic, the Minute Clinic or something of that nature. And we went. About 20 minutes later, the nurse comes out, and she's talking to me and Sonia, and she says, I'm just not sure, but something else is going on, and I think you should go to the emergency room. And we both looked at each other and kind of giggled and thought, the emergency room for a stomach ache? It's the stomach flu. Why are you sending us to the emergency room? And we didn't hesitate. We went to the emergency room, and the entire time we talked about where we could still get dinner reservations. The Keg, a local steak restaurant, was open until 10
Great
p.m.
spot,
And we thought, well, we can go there. And a couple hours later, after x-rays and MRI and CAT scan, we're sitting in this little room with the curtain drawn, watching a 12-inch television set. And the nurse walks in, turns the TV off, and sits down, has some papers in her hand. And without missing a breath, she looks at us and says, you have cancer. And just like that, our entire worlds were flipped upside down. But the immediate thought was, we'll fight it. I looked at my wife's eyes, and I knew she was a fighter. And we thought, yeah, this is a challenge, but we're in it together, and we'll fight it. And as soon as we said those words aloud, the nurse looked at us and says, the tumors in your abdomen are innumerable. We can't even count how many tumors there are. We're going to admit you for the night. So we thought, okay, we're not sure what that means, but we'll still keep positive and fight it. And maybe it's a misdiagnosis. We'll hear the results the next day. So they admit her on Thursday night. And that was almost the end of the day. I unfortunately didn't stay with her Thursday night. I had some dogs to take care of at home and make sure the house was situated. And the one thing, of course, I remember the entire day. But one of the things that continues to stick out to me is it was probably 2:30 a.m. Arizona time when I left the hospital to go home, and I needed to get it off my chest. I still hadn't processed what had been said. I didn't understand what had been said. So I called my best friend who lived in Michigan. It was probably 4:30 a.m. his time. And without hesitation, he picked up the phone, and I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't speak. I didn't say a word, and he knew something was up. And after about 30 minutes on the phone, I was able to get those words out for the first time that I had vocalized it and said, Sonia has cancer. And that takes us to the end of the night on Thursday, February 24th.
A lot of people who discover that they have this horrific diagnosis either they're able to do something about it and God forbid beat it. This was the case of my mother, for example. Or B, they have time. They have a little bit of time. And it might be a year, might be 6 months, might be a couple years if you're really lucky. But your case was quite a bit different. I think it's one of the things that makes it so insane is I remember seeing your post on Facebook where you announced that she had this. I don't know if it was the next day or a couple days later. And it felt like before you knew it, she was gone. And so what's the next 2 weeks look like as we kind of lead up to that day?
Sure. So Friday morning, bright and early, I'm back at the hospital. Friday was full of tests. We met with the oncologist. We met with other specialists. They were doing a biopsy. They were doing more MRIs. At this point, it was a big waiting game. Sonia still felt good. She walked into the hospital on that Thursday. She was out of bed. She was walking around on Friday. Everything other than the cancer diagnosis was fairly normal, which gave us a lot of hope. Yeah. We knew that numerous tumors in her abdomen didn't sound good, but we still had a glimmer of hope that there's a biopsy coming, there's a misdiagnosis, we can fight it. It may be years, it may be a year, it may be months, who knows at this point, but we still had some glimmer of hope. That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was a lot of waiting. So unfortunately, the oncologist wasn't working on Saturday and Sunday. The biopsy results hadn't come in until Monday. So that left us alone in the hospital. Not a lot of family around at that point. We did tell our oldest daughter the day after, who was an adult, the day after. We didn't tell our youngest daughter, who was a junior in high school, a 16-year-old, until that Sunday, because she was out of town for a cheer competition. We told her on Sunday when she had returned. So other than that, there wasn't a lot of family around. So it was a lot of me and Sonia in a room, waiting, contemplating what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. Monday is when things really escalated. So Monday, we get the results from the biopsy, and it comes back that it was a very small lump in her breast that had metastasized. And it had metastasized to her lymph nodes, to her abdomen, to her chest cavity, to her spine, to her hips, to her bone, to her liver, pretty much throughout her entire body. And the oncologist said, we can't even count the amount of tumors that are throughout her body. And on Monday, they said, we think she has months to live and we'll do everything we can to fight it. But at that point, it's months. So we started putting a plan together. How do we get through the next couple months? Do we need to notify family? When do we notify family? Sonia was a little bit stubborn, so she wanted to wait before we notified everybody. She didn't want 50 people around in a hospital room or in a house. And at this point, we were still in the hospital. So it was day by day. After Monday, Tuesday, which was day 6, things started to escalate and turn for the worse. She actually started to have some minor hallucinations, which was caused due to the liver failure, the cancer in her liver. And once that happened, it happened very, very quickly. And the hallucinations came fast and they were bad, and we could kind of see there was a turn for the worst. I think it was day 6 that the oncologist actually said, I may have been wrong with my diagnosis, and months is not the right word. It's more like weeks, and we need to contact our family immediately. So we started doing just that. We had her father, her sisters, our son came home from college. We notified everybody. We got him home, and it was day 7, which was probably the hardest for me. I believe that was March 1st. That was our anniversary in the hospital. So we actually celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary in a hospital room. I couldn't go to dinner like we usually do. Could have got her a nice gift, but it would have fell on empty ears. She got some balloons and a Starbucks drink from me, but that was about the extent of it on our anniversary.
Were you at Banner by chance?
We were at Gilbert Mercy.
So March 1st of 2022 was also the day I found out my wife was going to die. It's crazy to think that I didn't put the pieces together until you said that date. And then I went, wait a minute. It's the same day. And obviously my wife made it through all this, but yeah, you and I don't know if we're kindred spirits or what it is, but just the irony of the fact that your hardest day was the hardest day of my life as well. So a weekend or so, she starts having these hallucinations, and it's clear that she doesn't have a lot of time. How do you tell the kids? I mean,
she actually told our oldest daughter, who lives in Gilbert near us. She told her on Friday, day 2. And I wasn't part of that conversation, but I was there in the hospital room. And at this point, we didn't know how long. We just knew it was cancer.
Yeah.
And that was hard, just being in the room with my adult daughter, knowing what her mom means to her. At that point, my adult daughter hadn't been married yet. She hadn't had her first baby yet, which is my first grandchild, which would have been my wife's first grandchild. There were a lot of things that if Sonia was gone, that her and my daughter would have missed out on. Our youngest daughter was in California at the time, as I said. We wanted to wait until she came back on that Sunday. And she knew the entire weekend. Kids these days, they have Life 360 and Snap Maps and Google Maps, and she knew exactly where we were. As soon as we went to the hospital, she knew we were in the hospital. We just said, hey, it's precautionary. It's a stomach ache. They're checking her in to run some tests. I don't know if she bought it or not, but on Sunday when she came home, that was extremely hard to tell her, to get her up to the hospital and have her with us. My son, who was the farthest away in Texas at the time, he was a mama's boy, and parents never play favorites, but if I had to pick, I swear he was Sonia's favorite. They just had this special bond, this connection. And for whatever reason, she did not want to tell him the diagnosis. She didn't want him to know anything. And it was on our anniversary that I finally told him. But days prior, even leading up until that day, me and Sonia argued about whether I tell him or not. And I have on one shoulder the nurses chirping in my ear saying, you need to notify all of your family. It's going to be weeks. And then I have Sonia and her wishes saying, don't tell my son. And that was really tough, because in my heart, I knew that, I had 17 days from date of diagnosis to death. My oldest daughter had 16. My youngest daughter had 14. I was taking precious days away from my son by not telling him. And Sonia didn't realize that. She didn't understand it, or she didn't want to believe it, whatever it was at that point. Yeah. So on our anniversary is the date that I called him. And that was extremely hard. There's actually a great story surrounding that. So I told you he was playing baseball in college at Mary Hardin Baylor. I called the coach the day before, and I said, Coach, when I dropped him off in Texas, you told me you'd always have his back no matter what, on and off the field. And he said, absolutely, Shane, I do. And I told the coach, and the coach set up the next day to have him in his office, surrounded by his best friends on the team. When he was told the news on me by the phone, he already had a plan to get him a ride an hour away to the airport, got him on a plane. We picked him up and brought him in. So, I mean, outside of the diagnosis of your wife, looking at your kids, which are the most important things in your world, and telling them that their mother is going to pass away, it's unfathomable. I don't wish that on anybody. And honestly, I don't know how I did it and how I got through it.
Yeah, I remember just having some of those, having those same thoughts on how am I going to tell the kids, and that's one of the worst feelings ever as a father, is figuring out how you're going to do that. you know? So March 13th, you wake up and what happens?
March 13th was a little different. So if I can back up a little bit, we stopped
Yeah.
on about day 7. Day 7, she had her first chemotherapy in the hospital. The nurses told me they wanted a more targeted chemotherapy, but it was ridiculously expensive and my insurance wouldn't cover it unless she was not admitted in the hospital. So we had a plan to check her out of the hospital on day 8, literally drive her across the street to a cancer treatment center where she'd get more targeted chemo. Day 8, we had a really good friend, Dina Mackey. She was amazing. She's a nurse. She was with us by our side almost the entire time. She went to that appointment with us, and my wife almost didn't make it through that appointment. She was sitting in a wheelchair. They went to administer the chemo. She wouldn't wake up. She was pale. She was jaundiced. She was losing weight. And the lady administering the chemo said, "We can't do this. Your wife won't make it through chemo." And Sonia woke up out of a dead sleep and said, "You're giving me this chemo. This is the only chance I have. You're giving it to me." And, 3 hours of sitting there with her while we went through this was painful. But after that, we set up a hospital room in our house. She came home. Some great days, some bad days. This morning, as I prepared for this interview, I was actually going through old pictures, and day 15 was amazing. She was in a wheelchair. We were out of the house in the backyard taking photos with family. She ate dinner outside. We washed her hair. It was great. Day 16 was completely opposite. She slept most of the day. Her urine output was low. Jaundice was really, really bad. Her breathing was starting to take a turn. Day 17, it was a Sunday, and it just felt different. When I woke up, I didn't shower. I didn't shave. I came downstairs early in the morning and just sat next to her bed, and I held her hand. Our nurse, Dina, our friend and our nurse, Dina, was there the entire day. She didn't say much. We did have some last words between me and her, which were very important, but it was very limited on her side. We had done that a few days prior. So very limited conversation on day 17. And I remember sitting there with people in and out of the room. Her father was in and out of the room, my son, both of my daughters, her sisters, but I never really left her side. I mean, of course, I'd go to the kitchen for food or something, but I wanted to stay by her side the entire day. And I held her hand the entire day. And at about 10:50 p.m., I was in a chair next to her bed, and I let her hand go. And I'll never forget that. I let her hand go. Her father was sitting on the other side of the bed, and my oldest daughter was sitting at the foot of the bed. And at 10:54 p.m., my daughter Jasmine sits up in her chair, looks at her mom, gasps, and says, "Dad, is she okay?" And I looked at her, and I could tell she had stopped breathing. And we summoned for the nurse. Dina came in and pronounced her dead at 10:54 p.m.
And there's not that this would have changed maybe the outcome here, right? But you talked about this moment that you had where you let go of her hand, and shortly after she went. Do you feel like it was, in her mind, you giving her permission to go?
So I've thought a lot about that, and I realized that I was a little selfish in that moment and the entire day. As I said, I knew the entire day just felt different. And for me, I wanted to hold my wife's hand as she went. With the family, we had a lot of discussion about what the day was going to look like that she passed, what we were going to do after she passed, how we were going to react, how we weren't going to react.
Yeah.
And personally, I thought holding her hand, I wanted to be the one holding her hand as she went. And literally for 2.5 years after the fact, I still think about that. I thought about it this morning. And I truly think that me letting go of her hand to lean back in the chair and stretch was me giving her permission to say it's okay. She was hanging on because I was holding her hand. She loved me that much that she wouldn't die if I was holding her hand.
Yeah. Yeah, the just the amount of human connection is so powerful. Touch and words, and I have a very similar experience that ironically was happening right around the same time as you, where I was traveling as well. There's a lot of similarities in our story, and I eventually get to the hospital, and I had gotten news. I was convinced that she was gone. And when I left on the trip 2 days earlier, she was perfectly healthy, right? So it was a very sudden thing. And I remember walking into the hospital room, which I'm not sure how Mercy was, but there was COVID restrictions. So you had to be there before 7, only one family member. They gave us an exception to have a couple. And I remember walking in the room and sitting by her bed, and she was in a state of comatosis, was really rough shape. And I looked at her dad, who was the only other person in the room, and I just said, "Hey, how's she doing?" And she ended up right after having this intense seizure-like reaction, and I had to run in the hall and pull in doctors and nurses, and they're hooking her up to all kinds of machines and IVs, and they get her stable. And I remember a few days later, when she started communicating again, I asked her about that seizure. I said, "What happened there?" And she said, "When I heard your voice, it gave me life." And it's true, man. Like that, a connection specifically to a spouse is like the fact that you could have kept her for a moment on the other side of the veil is just amazing, And
Sure.
The fact that I was able to kind of pull her through just to say, "Hey, I'm here now," It's powerful.
Yeah, and at that point, the veil was very, very thin. So day 17, I'll never forget her last words to me, and she had some words after the fact that, weren't her. But her last words to me were, she called me daddy. Her last words to me were, "I love you, daddy." But just hours before that, sitting by her side in silence, the house was quiet. 3 things that she said and you got to understand, her breathing was very labored. She was raspy. You could barely understand if she did say anything, but I was sitting right next to her, and she said 3 things within about an hour of each other, a few hours before she passed. And she said, "Grandma," speaking of, I'm assuming her grandma who had already passed before her, she said, "It's beautiful." And she said, "I'm already home."
That's got to provide some level of comfort to you, hopefully.
Yeah, it did. And as tragic as this was, listen, everybody faces tragedy. You've had something very similar happen. Every one of your listeners have had something tragic happen in their life. And if they haven't, I'm certain that they will. Yeah. Everybody's tragedy is a little different.
Yeah.
I take some peace and some solace in knowing that during the 17 days, there were some really beautiful and positive moments that happened. People call them God whispers. You can call them coincidences. You can call them BS if you want to. I don't
Whatever
care. I
you
know
want.
what they meant to me. But there were some really extraordinary, unexplainable things that happened during that 17 days that initially I thought were for Sonia. And the more I reflect on it, none of them were. They were for me and for my family to help us get through. And they were truly amazing. And that's one of the ways that I've been inspired to continue to talk about it. And one of the ways that I've been able to push through and continue to move on.
What's an example of one?
So the very first one, and this is not the best, but the very first one was